Sky News at 11. Time now for our press preview. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making tomorrow's headlines. Joining us tonight, historian and author Kate Williams and media commentator Vince Graff. Welcome again, of course, because you've been here already. However, we'll update you first on the front pages, and we'll start with the Telegraph, which says a couple had their foster children taken away due to their membership of UKIP. 118 Conservative MPs have written to constituents to express concerns over plans to allow gay marriage. That's according to the Daily Mail, but there is a question mark over the number. Independent, meanwhile, claiming ministers have been warned that a relaxation of door-to-door sales laws may lead to vulnerable people being targeted. A former Archbishop of Canterbury has called for the Church of England to accelerate the introduction of women bishops. That's in the Times. Same story indeed making the front of the Guardian, but it's also featuring a picture of the latest protests in Egypt. The Eye reporting on the breakdown of talks on the European Union budget. Rich versus poor, they say. While the collapse of the negotiations is also the lead story for the Financial Times, with a rather subdued-looking Angela Merkel. Sun claiming Tory MP Nadine Dorries has vowed to use her newly found reality show fame to oust David Cameron, apparently, well, in other words. And the Daily Mirror has the latest on an investigation into the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. But let's see what Kate and Vince have made of the papers, because you've gone for the Mail with this political story on the 118 Tory MPs, although Sophie's indicating tonight that might not be...
Yes, your correspondent was suggesting that perhaps not all of them are quite as anti as it's suggested.
Okay. Andrew Pierce, however, of course, one of our paper reviewers, is claiming this as an exclusive. And I guess if they've actually written, then there is, you know, a paper trail there, isn't there?
There is. I mean, the number that they quote is amazing. Is more than a third of the number of total Tory MPs. And just to kind of summarise the story, these are people in letters who have voiced reservations to constituents against it. They haven't gone on the record, as it were, with. They've been speaking to constituents. They may, of course, be announcing their reservations but not saying how they're going to vote. But let's be honest, backbench Tory MPs are not in favour of this. David Cameron, part of the reason he's doing it is to, you know, detoxify the brand, to show he's moved on. A lot of Tory backbenchers do not want to have moved on from some old-fashioned values as they see it.
But is it actually different? Are they actually saying, are we looking here at Douglas Carswell, I think you've got to have your head stuck in the Westminster bubble to think this is a priority? They're actually not discussing the pros or cons of legalising gay marriage. They're actually saying this is not a political priority at the moment. You've got other things to think about.
I hate this argument. It's a really...
Why?
It's a really, I think, I'm not speaking particularly about Mr Carswell, but it's a really cowardly argument to say this isn't a priority. The truth is, governments can do lots of things at the same time. They can sort out the economy, they can deal with childcare and crime, they can do all these things, and at the same time they could bring in, say, a smoking ban, or they could legalise gay marriage.
The fox hunting ban, of course. I mean, this is a very interesting story, and of course why it's getting so much coverage is we're suggesting that Cameron might be struggling with a revolt here, and David Cameron is very, very sure. He very much wants this to go through, and he said, we've got a very interesting quote here. He said the vote could happen as early as January after Mr Cameron decided this week to get it done and get it done quickly.
And it will go through because Labour and the Lib Dems are totally in favour of it. It will definitely go through.
I think it's very important to him as well, because it's been said that it's also something that he has seen. We'll be talking about this later, about the Archbishop of Canterbury. He wanted an Archbishop of Canterbury who would be open to listen to the arguments for gay marriage, because clearly David Cameron feels it's a very important part of his manifesto. Talking of which...
Well, it wasn't in the manifesto. Actually, interestingly, it wasn't in the manifesto. But he thinks it's an important part of his social policy.
What the Conservatives are going
to... But
it's
this stuff that will... governments leave legacies. The sort of stuff that actually that changes society are things like the smoking ban. That is what the last Labour government really bequeathed the country, was a smoking ban. It's changed society fantastically.
Is that it?
No. But what I'm saying, But what I'm saying is, sometimes it's these...
Poor old Tony.
Sometimes it's the social issues that represent. And now everyone would think it was, you know, it feels crazy.
Speaking of which, I mean, the other issue, of course, at the moment is female bishops. And I think David Cameron was as shocked as perhaps some in the Church of England that it didn't come about. Now, of course, there is actually an argument for the government becoming involved in that because it is an established church.
Yes, it is the established church. Of course, the Queen is head of the church. I mean, she's a woman. If there's a female Prime Minister, she will be involved in choosing an Archbishop of Canterbury. And simply, it is a part of the state church, of course, formed by Henry VIII to move away from the Church of Rome, mainly because he wanted to marry Anne Boleyn. So it is part of the state church. It conducts our coronations, our state funerals, and there is essentially, I think they are not going to get away with this vote. Of course, it wasn't the bishops or the clergy who voted against women bishops, it was the House of the Laity. But I think it is saying here, what they're saying here, rip up the rules, and the rules are essentially that we'll have to wait another 5 years for a vote.
This is Lord Carey, this is not Rowan Williams, this is Lord Carey, George Carey as was.
And Rowan Williams is very pro-it, and Justin Welby is very pro-it. The idea is it will happen in a year, suggesting it might, a year or 2 years, we'll have to vote again.
And George Carey, no kind of crazy lefty, he's kind of on the right of the church. So it's interesting he's saying that. I think, though, that the Church of England is really a private club and they should be able to do what they like and what they vote for.
But there's not, though. That's the point. It's an established church. It's part of the nation.
I agree with you.
Well, there's arguments about whether it should be. You're right. It is the established church. Of course it is.
But women are already a member because they are already members. They're just members in a lower state.
Well, I understand that. But
they want to. Why should they be able to do? They are vicars.
I'm in favour of. If you were to ask me, I'm in favour of women bishops. I think it's crazy they're not. But I don't think, actually, as an outsider, that I have any right to dictate their rules any more than I have a right to.
So this is not as important as gay marriage?
To me, interestingly...
Well, gay marriage will be the next thing that...
Well, I don't think this will change society. I don't think this will change society quite as much as gay marriage, actually.
I think it's very significant, actually. I think it's very important, the idea that women are allowed to be vicars, but they're not allowed to be ordaining, they're not allowed to be in the higher echelons.
I think you're misunderstanding me. I think there should be women bishops, but I think they should be allowed to make up their own mind.
So really, the real nub would be if you had two female gay bishops who wanted to marry, and then you'd really start then, wouldn't you?
I think that's a front-page story. When that happens, I think that will get on the front page.
Only joking, as they say. For the moment, at least. Mail, page 10. There's an awful story about the poor old elephant that's resulted in this court action. We've been featuring Anna, of course, or Anne, I should say, rather. And Bobby Roberts was found guilty, although he wasn't actually the one carrying out the abuse, we should say. He was the boss of the circus. Conditional discharge. Seems odd, doesn't it?
Yes, it was his groom, wasn't it? He was abusing the elephant. She couldn't lie down, she was being beaten, she was being hit, and now she's been rescued and she's in the safari park, but her medication wasn't given to her. She had a terrible, miserable life. I mean, this is a very upsetting story.
Awful. But he did, I mean, on the secret video that the animal rights group planted, which is how we know about this story, and it's a story that the Mail was championing, kind of led the charge over when it first emerged. They raised more than £300,000 to rehouse the elephant and felt very strongly about it. You did see Bobby Roberts coming in and seeing that the elephant was chained and so on. So his hands are not totally clean.
Oh no, he had a duty of care. He was the boss of the circus.
And I think the sentence is wrong. I mean, he wasn't even fined. Apparently, there wasn't even an order of costs against him.
Each time Anne was changed, he never asked for her to be untethered. On one occasion, he supervised the changing over the chain from one leg to another.
Yes.
The judge said Roberts witnessed Anne in chains, but for reasons which she cannot explain, did nothing about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a bigger issue with this. I used to, when I was a kid, I don't know about you, but I used to go to the circus and see animal acts, and I really enjoyed it, and I thought it was all marvellous. And I've taken the kids to circuses more recently, and the vast majority of circuses now, of course, don't have animals in. And I did see an animal circus, a really kind of grim, I won't name it, grim small circus in the north of England.
It makes you feel rather uncomfortable, doesn't it?
And it made me feel really kind of quite grubby.
Yes.
And I think in 10, 20 years' time, we'll look back on animal circuses, which the government has said it will outlaw when it gets the time. I think we'll look back at it as rather strange and Victorian.
I agree with you, but I think there is also this wider question that simply animal cruelty is not very it hasn't got huge penalties very often. It's quite hard. You can treat animals very badly.
I'm just wondering what he could have
for
faced, actually.
Exactly.
It doesn't actually indicate here, because the chap that actually carried out the alleged abuse, Nicolae Nitu, is sort of fled back to his native Romania and has never been traced.
Yes.
So he's not been brought to justice as yet.
I mean, clearly this is a way of saving money, because obviously it's going to cost quite a lot of money.
Oh, judges. I don't think the judge.
No, not the judge. No, I mean the owner. He was working things on the cheap, and so he was letting Anne. You didn't take Anne out for big walks, because that's obviously going to be a big job, taking the elephant out for a big proper walk. Yeah. And she needed more space. She needed not to be transported around in a lorry. Anyway, and I think you're right. We need to,
as you say, a happy ending. The Mail actually donated 340,000
Mail readers.
So she's now in an 80-acre enclosure
and
in
water
Longmead.
pools. And she's got water pools too, because she
paddocks, meadows, and water pools.
Yeah, which is a happy ending.
Absolutely. I mean,
right. Okay. Not such a happy ending, as we can see from Angela Merkel's face, from the EU meeting. Cameron rejects EU budget deal. Well, is that actually fair? Because I think there was a few other people siding alongside him. Angela Merkel, Sweden,
Germany.
Netherlands, Denmark.
Yes.
Apart from that,
it wasn't just
often the contributors. Obviously, on one side you've got the countries that put the money in, and the other side the countries that take the money out. And it's some of the contributor countries that obviously...
But it's not a bad result, actually, for David Cameron.
I think it's very...
When we talk about backbenchers, because he can go home and say, well,
I stood up to Europe, exactly. I think he was going for a fight. He was going to say, look, we've got austerity at home. We've got to have austerity in the EU as well. He
knew what the outcome was going to be.
He knew what the outcome was going to be. He knows there's a lot of story about the EU gravy train. I think he knew it was the fight he was going to battle to win. But what he wanted to do was seem strong to the British nation.
But maybe. I mean, I'm no supporter of his in general, but maybe he was right on this. I think he was. I mean, the truth is... Yeah.
The problem, as Adam Bolt, our political editor, outlined, if there is this brinkmanship going into the new year, which is when they all meet again, if there is a failure then, it reverts to the existing budget, which is going to cost, and the others lose their deals as well. So,
but they didn't get a deal the first time round, last time round, so I don't think it's shocking that
the other thing, you think, all these meetings, how much is it actually costing, bearing in mind this gravy train and the bureaucrats and all their...
Yes, they're expensive meetings. Well, apparently they were debating so late they had to wait for their dinner till midnight, but they did get a £120 bottle of wine to ease it down. But I think the problem is with Cameron as well is that he looks quite difficult. It's quite difficult for him to make these stances because we get this massive rebate of 3.2 billion. Well, I think it's very hard for people to might say, some of the poorer countries might say, well, that's not fair.
Well, they are saying that.
Poland in particular.
They are saying that, but I think this rebate is a kind of slight myth because yes, we do get some money back, but there is no question, and I'm broadly pro-European. There's no question that we put more money into Europe than we get back. Our farmers do get money back and we do get this rebate. But the truth is, we are one of the richer countries in the EU. We give more money than we get back. And that's fine, except in bad times when actually people think, well, do I want to be paying for poor people in Poland and in Greece and in Portugal and in Spain? And the truth is, there are people in the rich southeast of this country that feel a bit grumpy about giving money to poor people in the northeast of this country.
Same argument as international aid, where we now say actually India is strong enough to stand on its own.
Yes.
So therefore we shouldn't really be paying.
Well, except people aren't starving. Well, it's even more extreme in Europe because people are not starving in Poland.
And they're starving in Greece, though. There are people in severe. I mean, I think the wider question here is, what do we want from Europe? I mean, do we want a referendum, or are we going to admit that to be stronger, we have to. I feel to be stronger, we have to stay with Europe. We're in a world in which China is soaring, India is soaring, Brazil is soaring. We can't be on our own anymore.
Do you not feel that, and I used to be fantastically pro-European and gradually are becoming less so, do you not feel that the centre of gravity is moving and that there will be a referendum? And though most people do not put the EU as their list of 5 most important things in the world, if you prod them and if you get them to vote, and if you force them to make a decision, they will probably say they're broadly against now. Well, I think the centre of gravity has moved.
I mean, this is the question, isn't it? Do we just give up on them when the going gets tough? So in the good times, we were having good, the euro did well for us. Lots of us went abroad and got cheap property. Is it? And of course, 50% of our exports go to Europe. We're very dependent on them.
It's a bit less now, but...
Yeah. The other thing, just to bring in the eye, rich versus poor split scup as EU budget talks. The other thing is reflecting there, France sidelined as Merkel sides with PM over cuts. So there is a changing dynamic too between Germany and France.
For France and Germany not to be... I mean, normally the decisions go through because that's what France and Germany want, and they kind of run the shop. So it's very interesting that Merkel...
Hollande is very obviously very upset that he's expecting the subsidies because, of course, the French farmers are a very important part of his constituents.
Yeah, and, of course, politically, he can't afford to rile them. And just reflect very quickly on that, The Independent, there's the photograph was Francois Hollande looking very lonely, one has to say, as Angela Merkel holds court there.
Even they're having their photo taken there, so even debating during that, so clearly it never stopped.
Turning your back on the photographer.
Can I make just a very trivial point? That's just one of my little bugbears.
Well, why not?
I hate headlines where they use the word EU as a pun on you, because no one ever reads that word as EU. It's just a very
I did try earlier, didn't I, Kate?
You did,
it's just not how we speak. Yeah. It's just, and you see it over and again, and it's lazy. And I'm sorry, Independent.
You must be joking. Coming up, the Rolling Stones ready to celebrate 50 years. We'll get to first look at the possible set list. Only rock and roll, but we like it.
Nothing wrong with my.
We're joined once more by Kate and Vince for the papers as they come in. The Telegraph is there with this extraordinary story about the foster couple losing their children being members of UKIP. Amazing.
Do you not? I read this story and it is extraordinary, and I just was left with a nagging feeling that there must be more to it than this. But as it's reported, this foster couple who haven't been identified in order that that the children in question are not identified were told they had an emergency.
3 children, wasn't it? An emergency placement.
And then along came a visitor from the local council and said that they. I'm trying to find the quote.
That they were. They
took on 3 children, a baby girl, a boy, and an older girl, all from an ethnic minority and a troubled family background.
Emergency placements of these children are taken away in the middle of the night. They just think
8 weeks into the placement, they received a visit out of the blue from the children's social worker at the Labour-run council and an official from their fostering agency. Were told the local safeguarding children team had received an anonymous tip-off that they were members of UKIP. The wife recalled, "I was dumbfounded. Then my question to both of them was, what has UKIP got to do with having the children removed?"
Absolutely.
And she said that she was very, the children were thriving there. So, I mean, the interesting question is...
What has it got to do with anything?
What's it got to do with it? I mean, they're saying it's racist policies, and obviously the children from an ethnic minority. But, I'm with you, Vince. Yeah. I mean, I think, is there more to this story?
Yes.
I mean,
But I mean, also, never mind, if you're a member of UKIP, it is absolutely perfectly possible. I don't share UKIP's views, but it's absolutely perfectly possible to be a member of UKIP. Indeed, more than likely to be a member of UKIP and not be in the slightest racist. It's totally possible, and as I say, totally likely. Though I'm sure there are plenty of racists in there, as there are all over the place.
For me is that to have a foster placement of 3 children, you are generally not going to be a first-time foster couple.
Yeah.
You're going to have done this before, so they are. I doubt that they're inexperienced. They've probably done it for quite a few years. And one concern, Michael Gove, of course, was saying last week that more children should go into care, less should be left at home, and we are in a shortage of foster parents in this country. We need about 9,000.
They're quoting
huge
here
amounts of people we need to do foster
the
parents.
social worker, who apparently they said UKIP does not like European people and wants them all out of the country to be returned to their own countries.
Which is of course nothing like UKIP policy. UKIP's policy is we should not be in the European Union, but it's got absolutely nothing against Polish people being here. It says they shouldn't have been given, say, there shouldn't have been an open door policy to let them in, but it's not talking about repatriation or anything like that.
But what's an interesting, but we haven't really got a comment from the council here, have we? This is what we haven't got.
Yeah, I mean,
so we don't know their side of the story yet.
They've actually approached them. It is, one has to say,
continued on page 4, so we don't know yet.
But it's a very interesting story.
But I think we are in a world in which foster parents are increasingly desperately needed. It's not a high-paid job. It's a demanding job. It's a difficult job, and those who do it, I think we are very grateful for them in this country.
And they should be allowed to vote for right-wing parties. Amazingly.
Well, there are some people who say UKIP's not even right-wing. It is just...
Well, they're former Labour voters, interestingly. They're members of UKIP, but it says in the piece that they're former Labour voters.
I don't think this is the last we're going to hear of this story. I think it's going to go on. I think there's going to be more revelations.
Let's take a look at the Mail, page 8. And it's going on, well, I guess, chapter 2 of the Savile story. Cyril Smith.
Yes.
Damning police files, spirited away by MI5, unheard victims haunted their graves. Mail investigation reveals deeply troubling allegations.
Well, yes, this is, a big investigation for the Mail here. 2 pages, a lot of detail. This is about Cyril Smith, a Liberal MP in Rochdale, who was elected in 1972, and it said that he was, very early on in his time in Rochdale, he became a child abuser. Quite a lot of children in children's home were abused, and the police had 3 investigations into it. Nothing was particularly concluded, but what is very concerning is that the files were taken from the police by MI5 and disappeared and never came back. And the suggestion is, of course, the word the Mail uses here, cover-up. The suggestion is there is some kind of cover-up. They say, where are the police documents now? Nobody knows.
Yeah, despite persistent inquiries by the Mail over the past fortnight, the CPS, Crown Prosecution Service, has repeatedly refused to say who took the decision not to prosecute the MP and why. Officials have also refused to answer any questions about specific allegations against the MP or whether they will be made public.
It's interesting. I was reading online today, Paul Waugh, the online blogger from Politics Home, kind of quite influential political blogger, who's from Rochdale and is saying what an extraordinarily influential figure he was locally. Before he became an MP, he was very active in the council and so on, and he was I was going to say a huge figure. It always sounds like you're making a pun, but he was just a magnetic, incredibly important figure.
You are right, Vince. I mean, it just says here, local committees, Rochdale Youth Theatre, Youth Orchestra, the governor of 29 local schools. And it just says we've also got the MP of Rochdale to thank, Simon Danchuk, the Labour MP, who has raised the question in the Commons about this.
There's an interesting reflection here, and of course, looking at the timing, the source says, with the Jeremy Thorpe scandal hanging over the political scene, it may have been politically expedient to sit on the matter. It appears Sir Cyril's influence politically was just too great and the issue was quashed.
Yeah, Private Eye, there was a local paper, a kind of alternative paper, sold in pubs for 9p, that had some of this, and Private Eye as well.
A local Rochdale paper, which
and then
was
there was
very cheap. And
it's an interesting, shall we say, lesson to be learnt when Leveson is going to perhaps start talking about control of the press. When one looks at what happened in these previous cases of Savile and of Cyril Smith.
Savile, and I presume, obviously, you know, the wider papers were terrified of libel because he was going to slap an injunction on them. And this is, you know, he's a very significant figure, he's a very powerful figure. He was, of course, knighted by the Queen in 1988. I mean, you know, he was someone I think people were terrified of taking on, including perhaps some of the newspapers.
But I think, Mark, I think your point is very true. I think I'm very worried about what Leveson might come up with. I think it's entirely possible that these sorts of things will be more likely if there is state.
Anyway, let's have a musical interlude because we promised the set list.
And you're going to sing?
It's sort of been smudged by someone. I don't know whether that's for contractual reasons or not. 20 million quid for five nights. I see Bill Wyman there.
He is. Yeah, we've got
as well, back on the bass.
Charlie Watts, Bill Wyman, Keith Richards, Ronnie Wood, and Mick Jagger, all at the top. Average age of the band is 68, and they are raking in the cash. I think we're all in the wrong job.
Yeah. But the Times is reflecting that they've left out a few favourite tracks, including Gimme Shelter, Sympathy for the Devil. Honky Tonk Woman's not in there.
One of my favourite, can't judge a book by its cover. You can't always get what you want. So number one, I think it looks like it's going to be Route 66. Last song is going to be Brown Sugar. But, you know, I kind of think they're going to play something big as an encore. Maybe a bit of, you know, you can't always get what you want as an encore.
Satisfaction's not in there on the shit. Well, there we are. That's all you get for 12,000 quid.
12,000 quid is what the top price on a resale ticket. So save our pennies.
Thank you very much. We'll see you again soon. Weather coming up.